I wanted to talk a little bit before. I'm going to make this carcass for this cabinet that I'm making, but I want to show you a technique, some of the techniques that I've developed that have helped my students through the years, that have helped me in my woodworking. And what I have devised here are some patterns that I use when I'm making dovetails that I need to repeat in a single project. Like, for instance, if you wanted to make 20 kitchen drawers where all the dovetails were exactly the same, so much the same that you could take one dovetail that you've cut for one drawer and make it fit into 20 other drawers that you've made. Nobody, as far as I know, has ever done anything like this. I developed it for my own students, for my own life. So let me show you what I mean and how it works. This is my top piece. This is my side piece. I want those to be, I want them to be interlocking, and I want them to be exactly where I need them to be when I come to cut them. So I'm going to make 4 dovetail corners identically. To do it, I've made a piece of wood. I've cut a piece of wood the same width as these pieces. So it doesn't matter about thickness and it doesn't matter about length as long as it's long enough. That piece I don't need right now. So this piece is actually going to be my template. It's going to be very different than a jig or something you would use, say, with a power router or a bandsaw. This is going to actually guide the hand tool. So what I want you to do is think this through with me. I'm going to come down from the end of here 1 inch like this, because I want this to stick above this piece. When I put these two together, I want this to stick above this piece. I'm going to be cutting my dovetails into here. I want it to stick above 1 inch. So I'm going to start laying out for my dovetails. Now this is pretty standard technique. You put one corner of your rule or tape on here, and then you make a line across here at a tangent, and you line this edge up. So I am dead on my 12-inch mark here, because I want to have 8 dovetails. Now if I wanted to do this, I could do it differently. If I made this 16 inches and drew a line down here, but I'm actually going to split this into 1.5 increments along its length. So I'm going to my 12-inch mark, which divides by 8 into 1.5 inch increments. And this is where we have to emphasize the need for dead-on accuracy. So I'm just going to put a line here, not that I need it, but you will be able to see it visually. So I'm going from that corner. Then I'm going to set some dividers. On the 1.5 inch increment here, where it intersects here, I'm making a line. Now I could go all the way along here like this on 1.5 inch increments, like this, dead on. So I'm working from one datum point. I'm not moving the ruler along. I don't want to do that because I'll gain, and then when I get to the opposite end, I'll be too wide. So again, right on 1.5, and there is my last 1.5. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces. Each one of these intersecting points now is the center of the pin recess that I cut into the dovetails. And you'll see this come together in a minute. Now there's something I could do here. I could take this and I can transfer these lines by putting this on that one line and bringing this up here like this, moving to the next line and doing the same. So I'm right on that center there, and I can move along like that. But also I can take the distance from that first point, as long as I was accurate, and I can set my calipers exactly on this. Now I'm going along this line here first. You'll see this unfold. So I go right on the outside edge. There's my first point, spin it. There is my second point, spin it. So everything is going from the datum point, which is this point here. So spin. So this is actually the center of every 1/2 inch pin. I'm going for 1/2 inch pins like this, and that last increment there should be right on the edge there. So once I've got those stepped off like that, we're dead on the point, so the center of those are the center of my pins. Now I want to go 1/4 inch on either side of those pin points. This again needs to be accurate. Now I'm going to mark both of these so you can get a visual, but I actually only need one, and I should just decide which side I want those, but you'll see this in a second. So bear with me while I step this off. And I think you'll understand. When you see this come together, it'll knock your socks off, I think. Accuracy, sharpness and technique are so important, and these are the things we strive for in everything we do. This last one is 1/4 inch from the outside edge. I've got my dovetail template. Now I go here and I extend this line up here. Look at this, so there. This is important here. Skip this mark and go to the next one here. Like this. Dead on accuracy. Like this. Now I'm going to mark the opposite ones just for you. I don't need this, but so you can see, so you'll get the picture for the dovetails. You'll start to see this come together if you see these lines. All right. One more. I didn't mark that outside edge. 1/4 inch again. There. So can you see the dovetails now? These have been extended up here, but these are actually going to be the points that I start on this piece of wood when I actually cut. So watch what happens now. This next stage is to increase our accuracy again. So I'm going to put this in the vise, lock it in here, and then I want to take this piece of wood. I've carefully prepared this. It's dead square. I've carefully prepared this. The sides are dead parallel. It's exactly the same size as this piece. The edge, the top edge, is dead square in both directions, and this I'm just going to put on here. In fact, this can go anywhere. This is a very sacrificial, temporary piece. Once I've used it, I won't need it again. So I'm just flushing this here, flushing this here, like this, and then I'm going to clamp these two together. Let me go ahead and put this on temporarily first, just to get the other one on. So I've got my piece of wood clamped on the back here. Now this is important, because what you're going to see now is how I'm going to guarantee my square cuts across the end of this board when I come to put my dovetails on here. I'm setting up this jig. Now this seems a little bit tedious, a bit long, and perhaps I wouldn't normally go through this, but I feel like it's so worthwhile to teach you this aspect of what I would do. So I think it's well worth it. I've got my dovetails marked on this side. You can't see this very well, but you don't really need to. You'll see everything in a minute. What I'm going to do is put my square on here. I've got my knife nice and sharp, And I'm basically going along this back edge on this sacrificial piece, and I'm just doing one side of the dovetails only. So I'm skipping one rake, I've come onto this side. So these actually are going to be, I think these will be the same distance apart as this. Can you see this? So these are actually the same distance as those. So it's the same setting. I've just transferred over. I've just done one side. But this accuracy is important. You'll see the benefit in a second. So you can see I've got these knife walls across here. I'm just going to put a pencil line across the end of my board, because this board is actually going to be the template that's going to guide all of my cuts. Across here. These are the points. Now watch what happens here. I go in here, and on the waist side of the line here, like this. So using the chisel hammer won't work, so I'm going to tap this back. That was a mistake, wasn't it? Great. Let's cinch it tight. So instead I'm going to go with my knife right on here and get my knife wall developed just for the step down to guide my saw in a minute. Because this back piece is purely to guarantee the squareness across the top edge of my work. So you'll see in a second. These are dead square and very accurate. So what I'm going to do now, watch this, I'm going to drop my saw right on that back edge, right on the knife wall, like this. And drop it down now onto this piece of wood. So you can see, I hope, that this is guaranteeing this knife cut, this saw cut is so square and so accurate, I don't have any question about it. Go on to this next one and do the same again. So I'm using the knife wall across there, and it doesn't matter how deep I go in here, but I'm just going maybe a 1/16 to 3 millimeters. Go again here, right up against the knife wall there. Can you see in that corner? Drop my hand down, follow the knife wall before I get into this end grain. There. I've used this many, many times, this trick, and it really works. Same again here. So now I can get rid of this piece. This was purely, that was the end of its work. I don't need this again particularly. So now I've got these aspects, they're dead square across, spot on square across. Keep this in the vise, and now I'm going to follow the rake of the dovetails themselves. This I'm done with, I don't need to use that ever again. Here's my dovetail saw. Now this is important because when I drop my saw in here, like this, I feel for the alignment of my shoulder and everything because I want to be square. And now I'm following the rake of the dovetail, like this. And I can go down to any point in here and stop. So can you see here? I followed my line perfectly down here. It's perfect. There is no variance. I'm going to do the same on this one. So can you see where my saw went past here? now I back up and I come along the top. I'm going to follow the rake of this dovetail and the rake of this one perfectly. So now I'm angling the saw. I'm not worried about whether I'm square anymore. Keep going, you don't have to stop. It doesn't matter where you start. I'm just going to the depth of the back where I have to stop there. Now this was my idea, I developed it. Nobody's ever done this as far as I know. I've never seen it done before. Keep on track. I know one of the things that you have to understand about dovetails is that for them to work well, they've got to be dead square across when you cut your dovetails, and they've got to follow the rake exactly or as close as you can get them to. And that's as deep as I need to go. I don't need to go all the way. So what we have is a half aspect to the dovetails cut. And when we come to this piece, all we need to do, we need to know how deep we're going to go, which is going to be the thickness of this piece here. So I'm going to put pencil line on here. I'm placing this on here like this. I'm going to use a black pen, I think, because you won't be able to see my pencil line on this dark wood. So flush here. This is a rough guideline that's going to get us close to where we need to be. Just like this. Okay, so this is my dovetail piece. So what we're going to do, instead of trying to cut to the line, I'm going to put this backer on here. This template is going to go on here. And this extension on the top brought me past. So you can see, remember how we separated this because I wanted 1/2-inch pins. So this actually is the part that we're actually going to see after we've cut. So I'm going to clamp this onto here, right on that line first. I want to feel for this side. I can do some tapping here in a minute. Get this aligned properly. And drop this now in the vise on this side here. I may have to go from one side to the other just because of my vise. This goes here. Now I've got a strip of wood here. This could be any scrap of wood, and I've got some super glue here. I'm just going to put a tab of super glue here. I've got a bit of accelerator here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this piece of wood right on that line that I marked across. So now I've got this glued on here. That's just a temporary guide. And I just rub my saw almost up to it. I don't have to rub into it, but watch what happens now. I take this now and let the saw freely in my hand follow the course. This upper part is now guiding the saw in the cut. And I just saw, really, I'm just the power and the energy behind this. I stopped just above that piece of wood. I do exactly the same on this one and on every one. See, I just hit the wood then, I could hear it. But I've stuck that piece of wood just above the line. There again, I heard it. You can see how this is working effortlessly. So the accuracy is in the jig, and that's the important thing to see here. Now I've overreached, I've got a long leverage here, I'm only in a very short part of the vise. I could move over to this other side, but it's still feeling nice and solid to me. I love this, it's working so nicely. Again, well, now we take this off. Watch what happens here. Take this off, turn this around this way, like this, because I need to put the line on. Sorry, everybody. This line comes down here. Just going to check I'm exactly on the line here and here. This accuracy is so important. That's perfect. See, I registered against the top of my bench. Not that that was my intention, but it worked so well. In another few seconds, you'll see this come together. There. And there. So I'm using the same guide, but reverse. And because I was so accurate squaring it across using that backing piece, it's given me a perfect start on this outer edge here. And you can use this with a pull stroke saw as well. If you're into Japanese saws, that's great. Same system. These look so crisp. When I take this off, you'll see. So let's see what we've got here. Pop this off. And now look at those dovetails. Look how pristine everything is. The angles are identical. They're exact opposites. So, and look at the inside too. Crisp, clean edges. This is the inside, so the dovetails are going to meet the bottoms of the dovetail recesses on the adjacent piece with this. But now look what happens. I simply take this, place this here, put this in the vise, and then I cut my next ones and my next ones and my next ones. And I have got my dovetail jig. I've got my dovetails identically placed. I've got dead on accuracy, dead on squareness. And you'll see in a few minutes when we do the pins and everything else, you'll see how this comes together. This is a perfect jig. All right, we've got to cut the recesses for the pins. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. It's not uncommon, but it's not common either. What we're going to do is we're going to use a cutting gauge or a slitting gauge. It could be either. They're both the same thing. This is where we use a bladed gauge that has, can you see right in there, it comes to a diamond point, and it has bevels on both sides. And you can flip this blade around so you put the bruising from the bevel on the waste wood. In this case, the bruising is going to be in this pin recess, and it's going to be on this side. So I've got the flat face on the outside of this gauge, and I've got the bevels facing the stock of my gauge. So this is what we do to use this. I've already set this, but let me show you how I did it. This is the corresponding piece in. You set the gauge here. You can set it barely over the thickness of your piece of wood. If you want your nubs of your dovetails to protrude through a fraction of a mil, that's fine. Pretty standard to do that. So I've got this actually flush, because usually with the compression of the fibers when you're chopping the mortise, so that is going to move it a fraction of a millimeter. So I've set this dead flush here with my face of my cutting edge. And then I'm going to go in between. I don't like lines over the whole of the dovetails. I don't like it to show. So what I'm going to do now is I go right on here, and I go right in between the walls of my the walls of the dovetails, the rake of the dovetails that I cut with the saw, the kerf. Right in between, work down or up, whichever way. See, I've got a little bit of resistance, so I'm pulling the other way now. So that's cutting nicely there. So I've got a nice knife wall. Really is a knife wall, just as we have done in other dovetail demonstrations. We're going with a knife wall here. And the only reason I can do this is, if you remember, I spent a lot of time planing this dead square. I got this aspect of it dead square, so I can use this as the reference face even across here. So I'm square across here. I come down. This is the inside face here. This is not going to be seen. So here I go down the whole knife wall all the way through like this. It gives a beautiful crisp clean line. If you're one of the people that likes to have the wall across your dovetails, this will give you an ultra clean crisp line that is second to none, rather than the bruise line that you get from using a marking gauge. And of course all your lines are dead on here, all the way around. So we're ready to start chopping here. This is my inside, so I'm going to just clamp this to the bench just to give me a little bit more security. Like this. I want this to be solid on the bench top here, and this works fine. 1/2" chisel, 5/8 chisel, because these are 1/2" here between the dovetails. So you do have a 5/8, could work if you have a 5/8. I've got 1/2" and I've got a 3/4. There's a 5/8, and I've got 2 1/2", which I've sharpened up. I've got 3/8 for getting in the corners. I've got my knife if I need it. And here I'm just going to chop here like this, just to get my start on the knife wall. So this is the inside face, probably less visible when we cut this. Good place to start. No need to do this outside face because these are going to be sawn. Just flick those out of the way. And we're going to go halfway down from one side here and then flip over and do the other side. And now we've got this wall established. Now watch this. Can you see here if I start, I'm going to start away from the wall 2 millimeters and chop like that. 2 mil and chop on each of these like this. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to keep the knife wall perfect. What this is doing, it's using the bevel of the chisel to compress the fibers without moving the knife wall. And this is going in about 1/8 of an inch here, probably. Now I'm going right onto my knife wall because there's a place for the bevel to go. And I go just like that. Can you hear that dit sound? I don't want to move that knife wall. So this is keeping that crisp line that we craftsmen rely on. Excuse me. Exactness we want this is what makes us craftsmen, craftswomen, makes us care about the outcome of every chisel cut. Okay, watch what happens now. I go with my bevel down this time. I go out here about that far, like that. And like that takes the full width, and that takes me down. And from here on, I'm going to focus on this one. Chop. Chop. That's not moving that knife wall, anything that would ever be discernible. Down here, lever, and chop. Chop. Now I'm down about 8 millimeters. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around, even though it makes it awkward for me, and come to that end of the bench so you can see inside at what I'm doing now. I think it's important you can see something other than the back of my hand. Can you see in there now? Crisp, clean, perfect knife wall. Spot on, or chisel wall, whatever we call it. So I'm going to put this way now and make it more visible for you. This is just to give me a little bit of security, really. Stop it from slipping and sliding. A little bit loose there. So here, watch what happens here. This is a bit keg-handed for me, but it'll work. So I go with the bevel down. Just use the natural property of the wood and the bevel. Chop. Right into the corner. Chop. And lever. See that? It's just splitting. This wood is very good for this. So would oak. Oak's a very simple, easy wood to work with, not hard at all. One of the easiest woods I've found. Walnut is easier. Cherry is easier. Sapele, not so easy sometimes. So I'm going right in at the wall here. Go down halfway because you don't have the opportunity like in other times where you can keep flipping your board over. If you're working with sapele, good on you. Try and keep these crisp walls here because you're going to be running a pencil along those walls when you're done, so keep the crispness. This really sometimes reminds me of elm. Elm is this kind of a wood I like to work with. And elm doesn't have straight grain. Sometimes it's a bit like, got a little bit of bulge there. It's going to be fine, but the inside, I need to be a little bit more careful there. Yeah, this reminds me a little bit of elm, working it with hand tools. We don't get much elm these days. See that just flaked up there? Can you see that there, Phil? Just a little bit. What I'd do with something like that is I would just take a little dab of super glue in there, just drop super glue in, press it down and leave it alone. Don't touch it and it'll stay. Hard on the tools. This is very hard on chisel edges. Very, very like teak. Teak isn't. It's not that teak is hard at all. It's got nothing to do with its hardness. It's to do with the amount of silica in teak when it's growing that causes the dullness to your chisels after a very short time. It does the same on machines, even with tungsten carbide tips. So it's not that teak is a hardwood at all, really. Just my view. Nearly there. Patience, yeah. A little bit there. I keep moving out to that outside edge. I'm keeping this rim. Some of you will know why. It's to keep the rim so when we turn over, the bevel doesn't force the material down and cause torn fibers inside the bottom of the pin recess. Nearly there. So that's that, and I just flip over now. Looks pretty good. Be careful when you flip over, you don't want any of these bits of wood underneath. Flip over here, drop it off the bench, bring it in here, then you've got nothing underneath. We've got the same issues to deal with here. But we're more than halfway, I'm pretty sure. So this is where we come in here. I don't know, maybe just hand pressure here. This is where I'm working against myself because of the camera. Oh, I know what I could do. Let's try something a little bit different. And actually this is a way I would probably work as well. 2 mil from the shoulder line. Work securely. That's really what my emphasis is, always to encourage you to work securely so you don't have any danger. This is not in any way dangerous for me. There's nothing I'm doing here. I think it is nice to work in a hardwood, don't you think? You could make this in pine. I think I said that already. Be fine in pine. No problem. I love pine. So now, here, and now I'm going right on my knife wall, that gauge line, that cut line. And I know that I am very directly opposite the knife wall on the other side. So I'm feeling for that edge. I got a little deeper with my knife there, with the gauge line, I think. Okay. Just flick, and you can use the bevel to lever here. This really is brittle. Broke the other way, that one. Maybe because I was a little bit deeper, maybe because of the grain. We'll see. So now I want to be careful because I could be closing in on that other side. Can you hear how hollow that sounded? Same there, really. Not sure why, because I'm solid on my bench top. Okay. I'll give you a little bit more to look at if I can. Ooh. So they're nice and crisp in the bottom of these, which is what I'm aiming for. I really don't want torn fibres. There's the one that broke. So here I'm going to tighten up on this, get that shear cut so I don't have torn fibres inside. So you can see inside, I think inside there, we don't have any torn fibres, which I think is the heart of any craftsman, craftswoman. We want everything lined up. Make sure you've got a clean bench underneath. Careful here, because we're coming to the breakout on the other side. That one's gone. What happened there? Ah, that's all right. That's fine. I thought I'd made a mistake. We're making a tool cabinet, but this could just as easily be a wall cupboard, couldn't it? For something else. I can't imagine anything more important, really, than a tool cupboard. There it is. Last one. This one's going to break through, so I'm careful. Careful. Looking good. Those are all my Monopoly houses there. Just tease that file in between, choke up on your chisel so you don't overshoot, and clean up that shoulder line. Nice and solid. I'm just teasing those fibers, rocking my chisel. I've got clean corners inside. It's one of the nice things about working with sapele. I don't think any wood is hard to work with, really. Not really. All right, a little bit of sewing now. Can you see inside there, Phil? I'm happy with the way they look. Crisp, clean shoulders all the way through here. Square edges, so when my dovetails seat, they're going to look nice. This is the only part here where you might have a little bit of a problem because you're really quite high up in here for cross-cutting. And there's my dovetail saw. So you've got a little bit of a problem here because it's so high up. So I'm paring into here, just into my knife wall, or my now gauge line wall. Let's see. We've got a lot of flex there. So what we can do is we can open this and add a little bit of extra rigidity here. I think we can we? Maybe not. This will work. Yeah. If you want to cut away from that line, you can. If you want the crispness of a chisel, you can do that. Just a little bit of paring just takes those fuzzy edges off the shoulder line, usually. And now we're ready to trace those onto the ends of the tail piece.